Welcome to Whispers of the Guilty, where we delve into the dark, twisted tales of true crime. Today we explore a story that combines the serenity of faith with the shadows of malevolence, leading us from the peaceful plains of North Dakota to the bustling campus of Stanford University. This is the story of Arlis Perry, a devoted young woman whose life was brutally taken in a place she considered a sanctuary. Join me as we unravel the layers of a case that remained unsolved for decades, a tale of innocence shattered by an unimaginable horror, and the relentless pursuit of justice that finally brought the truth to light. This is a story of faith, love, and the chilling darkness that can lurk in the most sacred places. Let's begin. Under the expansive, clear skies of North Dakota, Arlis Perry was born into a life of simplicity and devout faith. Her world was anchored in the small, tight-knit community of Bismarck, where values were as steadfast as the plains. Her family, modest in their means, found their wealth in their unwavering devotion to each other and their church. Arlis, the eldest of 3 children, was known for her nurturing spirit, always the one to lead her siblings in play and prayer alike. Her faith, a cornerstone of her upbringing, was reflected in every aspect of her life, from her participation in Sunday services to her volunteer work with local youth groups. As a teenager, Arlis's path seemed clear and purposeful. Her bright eyes were set on a future that balanced her spiritual beliefs with a desire to help others. She was deeply involved in her church's activities, often leading Bible study groups and organizing community events. Her commitment extended beyond her local parish. She was a frequent volunteer at shelters and food banks, always ready to offer a kind word and a helping hand. Those who knew her described her as a beacon of light, someone whose presence brought a sense of peace and comfort. In high school, Arlis met Bruce Perry, a charismatic and ambitious young man with dreams of making a difference in the world. Bruce was a year ahead of her in school, but their shared values and mutual admiration quickly blossomed into a deep and enduring love. Bruce was drawn to Arlis's kindness and unwavering faith, while she admired his determination and intellect. Their relationship was a blend of youthful romance and mature understanding, grounded in a mutual respect for each other's dreams and aspirations. After graduating high school, Bruce was accepted into Stanford University's pre-med program, a prestigious opportunity that promised a future filled with possibilities. Despite the daunting prospect of moving so far from home, Arlis was unwavering in her support of Bruce's ambitions. They married in a small, heartfelt ceremony in their hometown church, surrounded by family and friends who celebrated their union with prayers and blessings. The move to California was a significant shift for Arlis. The bustling campus of Stanford University was a stark contrast to the quiet streets of Bismarck. The sprawling grounds, dotted with palm trees and grand historic buildings, seemed to pulse with energy and opportunity. For Bruce, it was a chance to dive into his studies and carve out a path in the medical field. For Arlis, it was an opportunity to build a new life, even though it meant leaving behind the familiar comforts of home and community. Settling into their new life, Arlis took a job as a receptionist at a local law firm. The work was different from her volunteer activities back home, but she approached it with the same diligence and grace that defined her character. She quickly became a valued member of the firm, known for her warm demeanor and efficient handling of the day-to-day tasks. Yet, despite her efforts to adjust, Arlis often found herself yearning for the simplicity and close-knit connections of Bismarck. Arlis and Bruce's apartment in Quillen House on the Stanford campus became their haven. The modest space was filled with the warmth of their love and the hope of their future together. Arlis decorated it with mementos from home, photographs, handmade quilts, and religious icons that served as comforting reminders of the life they had left behind. In the evenings, they would talk about their days, share their dreams, and plan for the future. Their bond was strong, but the undercurrent of change and adjustment was palpable. As Bruce delved deeper into his studies, Arlis sought solace in the quiet corners of the campus, particularly the Stanford Memorial Church. The church, with its grand Romanesque architecture and serene atmosphere, became a place of refuge for her. She would often spend hours there, finding comfort in its stained glass windows and the echo of her prayers in the cavernous space. It was here that she could connect with her faith and reflect on the journey she was on, far from the life she had known. The Stanford Memorial Church stood as a testament to faith and resilience, much like Arlis herself. Its stone walls and intricate mosaics told stories of devotion and perseverance. For Arlis, it was a sanctuary, a place where she could find peace amidst the chaos of her new surroundings. She often visited the church at night, seeking the solace and clarity that only such a sacred space could offer. Life on campus was a blend of excitement and challenge. The vibrant academic environment was both inspiring and overwhelming. Bruce thrived in this world, his days filled with lectures, labs, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. Arlis, on the other hand, found herself navigating the complexities of this new life with a quiet determination. She missed her family, the familiarity of her hometown, and the sense of community that had been a constant in her life. Despite these challenges, Arlis remained committed to making the most of her new life. She continued her volunteer work, this time focusing on the local community around Stanford. She joined church groups, reached out to fellow students, and sought ways to contribute to the world around her. Her faith remained a guiding light, helping her to navigate the uncertainties of this new chapter. However, the idyllic facade of the campus and the church's tranquility would soon be shattered. As the days grew shorter and the crisp autumn air settled over Stanford, an undercurrent of unease began to creep into Arlis's world. It was as if the shadows that gathered in the corners of the church at night were harboring secrets, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. Unbeknownst to her, these shadows would soon converge, leading her into a dark and unfathomable encounter that would forever change the course of her life and leave an indelible mark on the history of Stanford University. As autumn deepened its hold on Stanford University, the campus was alive with the rhythm of academic pursuits and the vibrant social life that came with it. Students hurried to classes under the dappled shade of eucalyptus trees, while others lounged on the sprawling lawns, absorbed in books or conversation. Yet, beneath this veneer of scholarly tranquility, a subtle tension wove its way through the lives of Bruce and Arlis Perry. Their once seamless adaptation to their new surroundings began to show signs of strain as the demands of Bruce's studies grew and Arlis's feelings of isolation intensified. Bruce immersed himself in the rigorous demands of his pre-med program, spending countless hours in the lab and library. His passion for his studies, while admirable, left little room for the nurturing of his relationship with Arlis. Nights that were once spent in shared conversation and mutual support turned into solitary evenings for Arlis, her loneliness echoing in the quiet of their small apartment. She tried to bridge the gap by engaging with the community, attending church services and participating in local volunteer activities, but the sense of displacement lingered. It was during one of these volunteer outings that Arlis encountered a group of individuals who piqued her curiosity and concern. They were an enigmatic collective of young people who gathered near the church, discussing esoteric topics and displaying a fervent interest in spiritual matters that bordered on the occult. Their leader, a charismatic man with piercing eyes and a commanding presence, spoke passionately about finding enlightenment through unconventional means. He seemed to hold a magnetic sway over his followers, who hung on his every word with rapt attention. Arlis, driven by her deeply rooted faith and her desire to understand and help those who seemed lost or misguided, attempted to engage with them. She approached their meetings cautiously, her innate kindness and openness on full display. The leader, intrigued by her innocence and conviction, welcomed her into their discussions. Despite the group's dark undertones and the unsettling nature of their beliefs, Arlis saw potential for positive change and felt compelled to reach out to them with her message of love and salvation. Her interactions with the group were marked by an eerie sense of foreboding. Their discussions often took a macabre turn, delving into topics that contrasted starkly with Arlis's religious values. The leader, in particular, seemed to take a peculiar interest in her, often challenging her beliefs and testing her resolve. He would speak of hidden truths and the power of rituals, hinting at knowledge that lay beyond the grasp of conventional understanding. Arlis, steadfast in her faith, resisted his attempts to sway her, but the encounters left her feeling unsettled and wary. One chilly October evening, following a particularly intense discussion with the group, Arlis returned home visibly shaken. Bruce noticed her distress and pressed her for details, but she brushed off his concerns, not wanting to burden him further. She confided in him only that she had been trying to help a group of individuals who were spiritually lost. Bruce, preoccupied with his own pressures, failed to grasp the gravity of her unease, and the subject was soon dropped, leaving Arlis to grapple with her fears alone. As the days grew shorter and Halloween approached, the atmosphere on campus took on a festive yet increasingly eerie tone. Students decorated their dorms with jack-o'-lanterns and spooky decorations, while whispers of ghost stories and unsolved mysteries floated through the air. Arlis found herself drawn more frequently to the Stanford Memorial Church, seeking solace in its hallowed silence and the familiar comfort of her prayers. On the night of October 12, 1974, a trivial disagreement about their car's tire pressure spiraled into a heated argument between Arlis and Bruce. Frustrated and needing to clear her head, Arlis decided to take a walk to the church, a sanctuary where she had often found peace amidst her growing turmoil. Bruce, apologetic but knowing she needed space, watched her leave, the worry in his eyes shadowed by the night. The church stood in quiet majesty under the moonlit sky, its stone facade casting long shadows across the empty courtyard. Arlis entered through the heavy wooden doors, the creak of their hinges echoing in the stillness. Inside, the vast, dimly lit nave enveloped her in a cocoon of calm. She made her way to her usual spot in the east transept, where the soft glow of the stained glass windows painted the walls with hues of red and blue. As she knelt in prayer, the weight of her worries lifted slightly, replaced by a sense of divine presence that had always brought her comfort. She lost track of time in her meditations, the minutes slipping by unnoticed as she sought guidance and peace. It was well past midnight when she finally rose, her mind clearer but her heart still heavy with the unknown shadows that had begun to gather around her life. Unbeknownst to Arlis, she was not alone in the church that night. The security guard, Stephen Crawford, made his rounds, ensuring that the building was secure. Crawford was a familiar figure on campus, known for his diligent patrolling and his occasional conversations with students who lingered late into the night. He had noticed Arlis's frequent visits to the church and had even exchanged pleasantries with her on occasion, his demeanor always professional yet somewhat detached. As the clock approached 1 a.m., Arlis made her way towards the exit, her footsteps light against the marble floor. She reached the door, only to find it locked. Confused, she turned to look for another way out, but before she could move, she felt a presence behind her. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as a cold, creeping dread filled her heart. She turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat. What happened next unfolded in a series of swift, brutal movements. A hand clamped over her mouth, stifling her scream. In the dim light of the church, she caught a glimpse of her assailant's face, eyes glinting with malevolence, a sneer twisting their features into a mask of rage and madness. Arlis struggled, her fear igniting a desperate fight for survival, but the assailant was relentless. The serene sanctity of the church became a stage for unspeakable horror as Arlis was forced to the floor. The candles, once symbols of divine light, became instruments of her torment. She was assaulted with a brutality that defied comprehension, her cries for help swallowed by the vast empty space around her. The attack was merciless, culminating in a final, choking darkness as the altar cloth was wrapped around her neck, squeezing the last breath from her body. By the time the attack ended, the church had become a grotesque tableau of violence and desecration. Arlis lay lifeless on the cold stone floor, her body positioned in a way that spoke to a twisted ritualism. Candles were placed with deliberate cruelty, transforming a scene of quiet reflection into one of unimaginable terror. The church, once her sanctuary, had become her tomb. As dawn approached, the campus stirred awake, unaware of the nightmare that had unfolded within its heart. Bruce, growing increasingly anxious over Arlis's absence, began his search, unaware that his worst fears had already been realized. The peaceful facade of Stanford Memorial Church now hid a secret that would soon shatter the illusion of safety and sanctity that had once defined it. The early morning light filtered through the stained glass windows of Stanford Memorial Church, casting vibrant hues on a scene of unspeakable horror. The discovery of Arlis Perry's body by security guard Stephen Crawford left the campus reeling. News of the brutal murder spread like wildfire, shattering the tranquil facade of the university and plunging the community into a state of fear and confusion. The Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office swiftly took over the investigation. Detective Jim Collins, a seasoned investigator known for his meticulous attention to detail, was assigned to lead the case. Collins arrived at the scene with a team of forensic experts, determined to piece together the horrific events of the previous night. The crime scene was meticulously processed. Investigators photographed and documented every inch of the church's east transept, where Arlis's body had been discovered. The scene was disturbingly ritualistic. Arlis's body lay partially unclothed, with a candle inserted into her body and another placed between her breasts. An altar cloth, used to strangle her, was still wrapped tightly around her neck. Bloodstains and disturbed dust patterns provided clues to the violent struggle that had occurred. Collins knew that the first 48 hours were critical in solving a murder case. He directed his team to collect all possible evidence, including fingerprints, fibers, and any potential DNA samples. The candles used in the assault were sent to the lab for further analysis, along with the altar cloth and other items found at the scene. The entire church was combed for any additional clues that might lead to the perpetrator. Bruce Perry, distraught and devastated, was brought in for questioning. It was a standard procedure to investigate those closest to the victim. Bruce recounted the events of the previous night, his voice breaking as he described their argument and Arlis's decision to visit the church. He provided a timeline of his search for her, his growing panic as the hours passed without any sign of her return. While Bruce's alibi checked out and his genuine grief was evident, the investigators still had to consider all possibilities. They questioned him about any potential enemies or individuals who might have harbored ill intentions toward Arlis. Bruce could think of no one, describing his wife as a kind and compassionate person who had no known adversaries. Attention then turned to Stephen Crawford, the security guard who had discovered Arlis's body. Crawford had worked at Stanford for several years and was familiar with the campus and its routines. During his initial interview, Crawford seemed cooperative but somewhat evasive when asked about his movements that night. He claimed to have locked the church around midnight and discovered Arlis's body during his early morning rounds. Despite his apparent cooperation, Crawford's behavior raised suspicions. His account of the night's events contained inconsistencies, particularly regarding the exact time he found the church doors locked and his subsequent actions. Collins instructed his team to delve deeper into Crawford's background, seeking any potential red flags or previous incidents that might indicate a propensity for violence. Meanwhile, the forensic analysis of the crime scene continued. The candles, the altar cloth, and other items were examined for fingerprints and DNA. In the 1970s, forensic science was still developing, and the analysis took time. Investigators hoped that advances in technology would eventually provide more definitive results, but they were working against the clock to find the killer before the trail went cold. Interviews with students and faculty at Stanford revealed little useful information. Many expressed shock and disbelief that such a heinous crime could occur in their midst. Some recalled seeing Arlis at the church, always absorbed in her prayers and meditations, but no one had noticed anything unusual on the night of her murder. The enigmatic group she had been trying to reach remained a shadowy presence, their involvement in the case speculative and unsubstantiated. As days turned into weeks, the investigation struggled to gain traction. Collins and his team pursued every lead, no matter how tenuous, but the lack of concrete evidence was frustrating. The media's relentless coverage added pressure, with headlines screaming about the Stanford church murder and speculation about ritualistic killings fueling public fear. In a desperate bid to uncover new leads, Collins revisited the idea that Arlis's murder might be linked to other unsolved cases. He reached out to law enforcement agencies across the country, sharing details of the crime and seeking any similarities with other cases. This networking led him to the disturbing possibility of a connection to the Son of Sam murders in New York City. The perpetrator of those killings, David Berkowitz, had been captured, but his letters from prison hinted at broader connections to satanic cults and ritualistic crimes. Berkowitz's claims, though sensational, lacked solid evidence. Nonetheless, Collins considered every angle, even reaching out to New York authorities for more information. Berkowitz's letters mentioned occult involvement in murders across the country, but investigators could not substantiate these claims. Despite the lack of concrete links, the theory persisted as a haunting possibility in the back of Collins's mind. The investigation hit a series of dead ends, leads dried up, and the case grew colder with each passing day. Arlis's family, devastated by her loss, pleaded for justice, their sorrow amplified by the absence of answers. The Stanford community, still reeling, tried to move forward, but the shadow of the unsolved murder lingered. Years turned into decades. The case remained an open wound, a dark chapter in Stanford's history. Detective Collins retired, passing on the unsolved mystery to a new generation of investigators who, despite advances in forensic science, struggled to find the breakthrough they needed. It wasn't until 2018, more than 4 decades after Arlis's murder, that a major development occurred. Advances in DNA technology allowed cold case investigators to re-examine evidence from the crime scene. A DNA sample, preserved on a piece of Arlis's clothing, was finally analyzed with the latest techniques. The results pointed unmistakably to Stephen Crawford, the very security guard who had discovered her body. On June 28, 2018, a team of investigators arrived at Crawford's residence with a search warrant and the intention to arrest him. Crawford, now in his 70s, reacted with shock and despair. As the officers closed in, he retrieved a gun and ended his life with a single gunshot, avoiding the justice that had eluded him for decades. The revelation that Stephen Crawford, the security guard who had discovered Arlis Perry's body, was indeed her killer, brought a measure of resolution to the case, but it also left an indelible mark on all who had been touched by the tragedy. The long-awaited closure was bittersweet. tinged with the sorrow of knowing that Crawford had taken his own life before he could face justice. As investigators and the community grappled with these final truths, they sought to understand the deeper currents that had shaped the events of that fateful night. In the days following Crawford's death, a flurry of activity surrounded the re-examination of the case. The media, always eager for sensational headlines, delved into Crawford's life, uncovering details that painted a picture of a troubled man with a dark past. Born in 1946, Crawford had served in the military before taking on various security roles, eventually landing the job at Stanford. Colleagues and acquaintances described him as a solitary figure, diligent in his work, but often distant and unapproachable. Forensic experts revisited the evidence with fresh eyes, scrutinizing every detail to understand how Crawford had evaded suspicion for so long. The DNA match was the definitive link, but it was Crawford's behavior and psychological profile that intrigued investigators. His interactions with Arlis had seemed benign at first glance, but the inconsistencies in his statements and his presence in the church on that night suggested a man who had been hiding his true nature behind a facade of normalcy. Detective Collins, now retired but deeply invested in the resolution of the case, watched from the sidelines as the final pieces fell into place. He had dedicated years of his career to solving the mystery of Arlis Perry's murder, and while the breakthrough came too late for his tenure, it brought him a sense of peace. The case had haunted him, as it had so many others, and he found solace in knowing that Arlis's family could finally have some answers, even if incomplete. As the investigation into Crawford's past continued, several disturbing patterns emerged. Crawford had a history of erratic behavior and had been involved in minor incidents of violence, though none had ever escalated to the level of murder. He had kept a low profile, blending into the background of his various roles, but his interest in the occult and his fascination with ritualistic practices became apparent through diaries and personal writings discovered during the search of his home. These writings, filled with dark and cryptic musings, suggested a man deeply troubled and possibly influenced by fringe beliefs. Investigators speculated that Crawford had been drawn to the church not just as a place of employment, but as a stage for enacting his twisted fantasies. The ritualistic nature of Arlis's murder now seemed less an act of random violence and more a premeditated execution rooted in Crawford's disturbed psyche. Arlis's family, while relieved that her killer had been identified, faced the daunting task of processing this new information. The long years of uncertainty had taken their toll, and the final resolution, though clear in terms of guilt, still left many emotional wounds. They held a memorial service in her honor, a gathering that brought together friends, family, and members of the Stanford community who had been affected by her death. It was a time to remember Arlis not just as a victim of a heinous crime, but as a vibrant young woman full of life and faith. The service was held at the same Stanford Memorial Church, where Arlis had sought solace and where her life had been so brutally taken. The church, with its grand architecture and serene beauty, now stood as a symbol of both tragedy and resilience. During the service, those who had known Arlis shared memories of her kindness, her deep faith, and her unwavering commitment to helping others. Her spirit, they said, would always be remembered, a light that had touched many lives even in her short time. As the community reflected on Arlis's legacy, the university took steps to address the safety and security concerns that had been highlighted by her murder. New measures were implemented to ensure that the campus remained a safe space for students and staff, and the tragic lessons of Arlis's death were woven into the fabric of the institution's ongoing efforts to protect its community. In the broader context, the case of Arlis Perry became a touchstone in the evolving field of forensic science. The advancements in DNA technology that had finally brought her killer to justice underscored the critical importance of preserving evidence and continually revisiting unsolved cases with fresh perspectives and new tools. Arlis's case served as a reminder that even the coldest cases could be resolved with perseverance, dedication, and scientific progress. Looking back, the investigation into Arlis Perry's murder had spanned decades and involved countless individuals, each contributing to the quest for truth in their own way. The case highlighted the complexities and challenges of solving crimes that seem to defy explanation, and it demonstrated the power of tenacity in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. For Bruce Perry, the resolution of the case marked a poignant end to a chapter that had defined much of his life. The years since Arlis's death had been filled with their own challenges and triumphs, but the shadow of that October night had never truly lifted. With the case finally closed, Bruce found a measure of closure, though the memories of his young wife and their short-lived life together would always be a part of him. As we close the chapter on this haunting tale, we are left to reflect on the life of Arlis Perry, a life marked by unwavering faith, love, and a tragic end that shook a community to its core. The decades-long journey to uncover the truth behind her murder reminds us of the relentless pursuit of justice and the advancements in forensic science that can bring closure to even the coldest of cases. Arlis's story is not just a narrative of crime, it's a testament to the enduring human spirit and the profound impact one life can have on many. Her legacy of kindness and devotion continues to resonate, offering a beacon of light amidst the darkness. Thank you for joining me on Whispers of the Guilty. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe and stay tuned for more true crime narratives that delve into the enigmas and shadows of our world. Remember, behind every whisper lies a story waiting to be told. Until next time, stay safe and vigilant.